The Rockpile Report.
Buffalo, New York is going to be the epicenter of every stargazing nerd's wet dream.
With Buffalo Bills season ticket holder, Drew Geter.
If there was ever a time to break out Skyline Chili, it's when the Bills are 5-2, right?
The Rockpile Report. The pettiest, hardest drinking Bills podcast. To another edition of the Rockpile Report podcast. I'm your host, Bills season ticket holder Drew Geer. That's my producer, Chris Kruger. And it is time, Chris, the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. Did you think we'd be here back in August? Yes, I did.
And
it's also time to break out some rum.
Oh my God. What are you drinking?
You didn't even see me walk into the studio with this.
What is?
It's rum.
What?
It's so good.
Did you steal that from Margaritaville?
Close. Jessica bought it at Goodwill. She's been into thrifting lately.
You're okay, so rotate that thing. Is there a face on it, or is it like some sort of design? Like, what is it? It's a mermaid.
Yeah, can't really tell because my cameras don't zoom. That's probably better. Look at that. Beautiful.
Guys, it's one of the coldest weeks in Buffalo so far out of the last month. And this jerk-off is over here drinking out of a mermaid glass as if he's, what is it, a Bahama Mama?
No, it is my go-to for rums. If you're going to make a rum cocktail, 1.5 ounces of rum, 1.5 ounces of juice, ounce of liqueur.
What juice?
And just anything, whatever you want to use. This is my template. 1.5 ounces of rum, 1.5 ounces of juice, ounce of liqueur, 1/4 ounce of simple syrup, and then whatever bitters you want to use. Somebody gave me passion fruit syrup earlier this year at a tailgate, so it's got passion fruit syrup in it. It's delicious.
God, I hate you. I hate you so much. But I don't know. Do I hate the Ravens more? That's the question this week. Guys, your divisional round preview, the Baltimore Ravens against the Buffalo Bills. Your time, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard. We are the Sunday night closer. The place, Ralph Wilson Stadium in Orchard Park, New York. Maybe the last division round game that building gets to see.
Still got next year. I mean, I was shocked that I thought we would have been Saturday night and not Sunday night. And I didn't even realize that they adjusted divisional games to the championship window time slot of 3 and 6:30.
3 and 6:30.
I don't know when that happened or why I was being like you when it comes to the scheduling.
The weather, it's about to be single digits by kickoff. So for everybody traveling in for the game, you better dress the part or you will suffer the consequences. I mean, that building is just the new stadium has so many amenities and niceties built into it, warming stations and heating zones and a canopy, even though some people cry that it's not as great as a dome. Right now, you are going to sit inside of a block of concrete. And when it gets down to single digit temperatures, you might as well be sitting on top of an iceberg. Chris, the metal bleachers and the concrete, it doesn't help.
I'm not sure we're going to be doing much sitting.
I don't think anybody
when
does.
Kickoff happens.
No, I think this is a game you stand the entire time. And as far as the wind chill, they say it's only going to be 10-mile-an-hour winds, but anybody who's ever been inside that stadium knows that there are lies, there are damn lies, and then there's you telling me there's not going to be 15-mile-an-hour winds at the stadium. That's it. The line is the Bills plus 1.5 points. Chris, do you know that this is the first time that the Bills have been home underdogs since 2020?
It opened Bills -1.
Yeah.
The line flipped. So I like our chances.
Now, here's a question. Do you know who we played the last time we were a home underdog?
No, I did see that yards per pass put it out on Twitter, and I did not. I read it, but I didn't retain the information.
That's not shocking to me whatsoever. The Seattle Seahawks in 2020, that was the AJ Klein coming out party where we were just resounding. We beat the brakes off that team. Your crew for the game is Carl Sheffers. 6th fewest penalties in the NFL. He has screwed Buffalo in the past, but so what? Like, here's what I found funny when I was looking at the referee assignments. Clay Martin is calling the Chiefs-Houston Texans game, and everybody's already crying foul because the Chiefs are 6-0 when that referee calls their games. And on some, like, we all know the league in the NFL officiating does tend to give the Chiefs the benefit of the doubt on a lot of things that they probably shouldn't. But at the same time, Chris, how many officials do you think exist where the Bills have an undefeated record when they ref our games? Simply by virtue of the fact that we've been a really good football team for a really long time.
Yeah, I don't really pay attention to that, and I don't know how much that matters.
No. You know, what does matter is who's on the call. Of course, not for those of us who will be at the game, but for those of you listening at home, Nance and Romo, CBS A Squad.
Like, divisional round, we're all down to A's.
I know.
You're not going to get your Spiro Ditases or...
Which would be funny. Like, what if they did randomly? They just put on, like who is the D squad for CBS?
Tom McCarthy.
So what if randomly Tom McCarthy is just in the booth with Romo and Nance? Like, what if they just bring him in for comedic relief?
They better not.
It also might be the last tailgate at Dock Slot of the NFL season. Guys, 4180 Dock Slot on Abbott Road. I'm going to have a white chicken chili. We're going to have some pit beef sandwiches. I'm going to make some crab cakes just to piss off one guy at the tailgate. I'm going to bring him and I'm going to fry him in a pan over the thing. And he claims he's going to punt him onto the roof. But honestly, I haven't seen him do anything that athletic in all the years I've known him.
Mark?
Yeah. So with that said, I'm going to make a bunch of them just to see if I can watch him try. Can you imagine if he pulls his groin?
That makes sense.
Trying to punt a crab cake on the roof like he's a cut rate Brother Bill.
Yeah.
Chris, what do you got? Premix cocktails? Maybe some wing dip?
You know, I might do wing dip because it's possibly the final tailgate, but I got one bottle left of the what did I do? Hazelnut and cardamom.
Ooh.
Old fashioned. You didn't?
No, the orange cherry.
You wanted the orange cherry out. I'll have some other ones. I don't know. I know I do have to make more pecan syrup. I'm up running low upstairs. So maybe something with pecan syrup.
If you guys are planning on parking with us, I've already gotten multiple DMs from strangers who don't know us being like, hey guys, is the tailgate like an invite only thing? No! Just let me know you're coming. And if you need a spot, you don't even have to let me know you're coming if you just want to walk over. But if you need a parking spot, let me know by Friday. All right? Let me know by Friday. DM, tweet, DM us or tweet us at Rockpile Report. rockpilereport716@gmail.com. Send a carrier pigeon, smoke signals. I mean, I can't read them all that well, but you can send them. However, whatever it is, let me know by Friday. And then what I love about this game is that we're going to already know whether or not we've got a shot at hosting the AFC Championship game by Sunday morning. So by the time we get in the truck and leave, we'll know whether or not this is the last game.
Slim chance.
Hey, it's almost like crossing the streams.
Yes.
You're saying there's a chance? I love it. I love this plan. I'm happy to be a part of it. DraftKings has Kansas City as a 7.5-point favorite as of today. Injuries to watch, both teams are relatively healthy. I mean, the Bills, it's Ray Davis. Bills, the injury of note is Ray Davis with a really unfortunate concussion. For the Baltimore Ravens, it's their wide receiver one, Zay Flowers. He's got a knee, and Harbaugh said during a press conference yesterday, they'll wait till later in the week to see how he's doing, and then immediately walked it back and was like, but he could play. He could play without practicing, because he's such a good talent. Chris, do you feel like he's just covering his tracks because he kind of slipped up? and was like, well, we'll see what's happening with him by the end of the week. And then was like, wait a minute, but if Dibba, because I want him to be able to not participate and the Bills still have to prepare like he's going to play.
Yes.
I feel like that's a classic misstep by a coach. This game, Chris, what I love is that off air, I was talking to Chris about Carl Weathers. And what I love about Chris is that I can say the name Carl Weathers to Chris and he immediately goes, oh yeah, Chubbs. There is no other iconic film role that comes to mind for Chris when you bring up Carl Weathers.
He wasn't in Coneheads.
The only other movie that you know?
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. Ahead of this game, I'm probably going to watch Rocky IV at least twice. Maybe 3 times, depending on how early my wife falls asleep. Because that's what this game feels like to me. I mean, when you think about how our season started, and then I think about how this all went in the run up to week 4, the Buffalo Bills weren't supposed to be good. And all of a sudden they came out and just started putting on a show offensively. And we literally were Apollo Creed dancing around in a star-spangled hat. Well, what's his face? Coke habit with bad hair, Chris. Living in America. James Brown. Well, James Brown was back there freebasing and dancing. We were out there having a ball. We thought we were on top of the world. And then we rolled into week 4, Sunday Night Football, and just got pummeled. We got pummeled to a degree that our friend Mike, listener to the show, Mike, ended up at Mark's house just screaming profanity, which is totally out of character. I was sick for that game, and I was really happy I didn't show up at Mark's house. In fact, it was such a resounding loss that I didn't even know what to do. And I was like numb. My wife's like, oh, you're taking this really well. I go, I don't even know what to say. It's such a thorough beating. I'm not even angry. I'm just depressed.
Carl Weathers has a weak filmography.
Weak? Predator.
When I say weak, I mean there's not a lot there.
Yeah, because he made so much money and he was so good that he didn't need to do anything
else. Semi-Tough, Death Hunt, Action Jackson. He's uncredited for Chubbs and being in Little Nicky. And 8 Crazy Nights, The Comebacks. He was on an episode television. He's in Starsky and Hutch. In The Heat of the Night. The Shield, Arrested Development. Alien Siege. Not to be confused with Under Siege.
I hate you and your limited your limited knowledge of cinematography. When we think back to that last Bills-Ravens game, the only reason it didn't feel like someone died is because the Bills did what Rocky didn't have the guts to do, and they threw in the towel. And they pulled Josh Allen out of the game and stuck Mitch Trubisky out there to eat punches until the clock ran out. So now we've got another game here. We get a redo. Once again, in front of the entire football watching world, under the primetime lights. Both teams have had time to sharpen their skill sets. The Bills have had time to find a tougher resolve, grow as a football team, do a lot of training, running up and down mountains. And the season for both teams hangs in the balance. I mean, this is the type of stuff they make movies out of, and I'm not going to lie. Chris, there's a lot of podcasts that they want to come in here and they want to talk about this, and they want to just, let's talk about the X's and O's and the science of this matchup. And while I care about some of that, like, maybe it's just the journalism degree talking, but I don't know. I like to romanticize these things. I enjoy thinking about it through the lens of Rocky IV. Like, this is your Rocky versus Drago. This is you're not supposed to be able to beat that guy because he's a murderer. He's going to maul everything you put in front of him, and they've been beating people literally to death. And yet you're going to get in there. You think that you're tough enough this time around, and you're going to see if you can't counterpunch your way out of. Now, Chris, quick question. Hearts on Fire or In the Burning Heart?
I don't know what that is.
Of course you don't. Which song from the Rocky IV soundtrack do you prefer? Of course you don't know the answer to that because you're a plebeian when it comes to movies.
The answer is Eye of the Tiger by Survivor.
A lot like Balboa when he was stepping into the ring in Moscow after running up and down mountains and squatting wagons. We as a Bills team are in a much different place from the Bills team that first stepped onto a field with the Ravens. Like, first of all, our offensive coordinator has matured in spades, and his play calling acumen has dramatically improved. He's weaponized nearly every square inch of talent on this roster that he has at his disposal, as evidenced by last week's 55-yard touchdown to Curtis Samuel, a guy who for most of the year was completely useless. And just, Chris, the running game is working. Mac Hollins is a weapon. Kincaid, who everyone thought was going to have to do all the heavy lifting on offense, is almost an afterthought. He's only playing about, 50% of the snaps over the last month and a half? The offensive coordinator is doing a lot of the heavy lifting for what has been a prolific Bills attack. That's a huge departure from the guy calling one of the worst trick plays, not just in terms of design, but also timing, that I think the league saw this year. You also look at the interior offensive line. They're playing the best football that they've played all season, both in run and pass pro. Compared to last year, when we squared up against the Baltimore Ravens, our center was statistically one of the worst in the league. Chris, 4 weeks into a position change, it's reasonable to accept the fact that if healthy, a good offensive lineman will find his footing. But it probably takes more than 3 weeks, right?
Correct.
You look at the rest of the line that's gelled around McGovern as he's grown into that role, and you now see this as a strength of the offense instead of something that we have to try to deal with, which is what we were doing at the beginning of the season. Balin Spector, who was our worst run defensive, the worst run D linebacker on the entire team, is on the IR, and we now have a healthy stable of linebackers around him. Bernard's not concussed, and he was just coming off a game where he played 100% of the snaps and was integral in pre-snap communication and adjustments by a defense that allowed only 7 points. Matt Milano came back, and his instincts at this point in his career are so much more important than his athleticism. And I think that that's the thing that makes him a better fit for a game like this than Dorian Williams. Wouldn't you agree?
I'll take your word for it.
I mean, would you rather have a guy who just is playing see-ball, get-ball, or do you want to have a guy in a game like this with all of the various angles at play who can think faster than the snap and faster than the motion of the ball and process faster than that?
And the experience.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I watching the Washington Commanders game on Sunday night after our game. Levante David made a play. Levante David's a 31-year-old linebacker who I'm pretty sure the Buccaneers were trying to move on from and just couldn't figure out a way to do it. Jaden Daniels is like the next athletic kind of like phenom quarterback. Hey, I can run, I can pass accurately, I can do all these crazy things. Levante David's old as shit compared to him, but he beat him to the line of scrimmage on a third down or a fourth down play and kept him from picking up a first just with instincts and knowing how to take the right angle to cut that kid off on his way to the line of scrimmage and force him out of bounds. Or maybe it was a third down and like 2, and he forced him to a 4th and 2, and that was one of the plays where they went for it and didn't get it. And so it kept Tampa Bay in the game. You don't get to that point if you don't have a linebacker who can read the quarterback to that degree. It's incredibly important what Milano brings in that regard, more so than because Chris, no one will ever say he's a better athlete than Dorian Williams.
Yeah,
Dorian Williams is a freak. He just doesn't have it between the ears right now, not the way Matt Milano does. Tyron Johnson is back on the field for Buffalo, a departure from Week 4. He's our best run defending defensive back, who in that game was replaced by Cam Lewis, who. You say what you want about him. He's turned a corner. He's having a really nice season, probably his best as a pro. He finished that game as the Bills' worst-rated defender overall, led the team with 4 missed tackles. You missed more in a game where they forced a ton of missed tackles that led to extra yardage. You missed the most. Also gave up 39 yards in coverage and 2 first downs. You now have Teron Johnson, who's an all-pro at his position. The entire middle of our front seven will be manned by different players. And entirely different skill sets are going to be out there on the field and available to us. While our offense has found a different gear and our offensive coordinator's grown. I guess my question is, how could the results not be even slightly different? So for every pundit who just kind of lazily goes, well, they beat the hell out of the Bills the last time they played them. So what? That was 16 weeks ago. In Wayne's World, live in the now. With that said, the Ravens aren't exactly the same team we saw 16 weeks ago either. And I'm excited to talk to tonight's guest all about it. And so with that, we bring back the only guest from the Ravens fan base that we allow on the show. He's one of my favorites. Chris, undoubtedly probably our best guest in terms of his knowledge of X's and O's, Mr. Ken McKusick from Film Study. How are you doing, man?
Life's good, Drew. How about you?
Not too bad. We just got done recording your spot, actually, and it was a lot of fun. It's always nice to act like I have a little more decorum than I actually do. It's nice. It's almost like I put on a blazer. I feel very official.
That sweatshirt of yours is your blazer. Yes, I know that feeling in semi-retirement, believe me.
I sit down and I go, man, this is nice. I'm having an intelligent conversation, and now we're going to switch gears and talk about our nonsense. Ahead of this game, there's so much riding on this, and I really do feel the vibe of like, I know you're rather agnostic sometimes when it comes to, because you're a season ticket holder, but you don't seem to get into a lot of the rah-rah fan base versus fan base acrimony that seems to be going on right now, especially. You could see how this could have a very like Rocky IV vibe to it. The kind of East versus West, you're going to have a frenzied crowd full of mixed company that's going to be screaming. And I think that this carries a little more gravitas when you consider the profile of each quarterback, where each quarterback is in terms of their careers. It's such an interesting thing to me. You've got two guys who are both vying for an MVP this year. They're both hoping, Allen hoping he can get his first, Lamar hoping to get his third of his career. And at the same time, both of them kind of have developed a reputation for not being able to get it done in the postseason. From a Ravens fan perspective, what's it like when you see how talented Lamar is, and yet you know that you've fallen short a lot?
I mean, it's not good. I mean, obviously losing the AFC Championship was bad. The Ravens need to get over this hump. It's very important that Lamar do this to cement his legacy. He's got every other box checked for the Hall of Fame. And in fact, he'll be a Hall of Famer. It doesn't matter. Even if he never wins a Super Bowl, he's going to make it. But he's got every other box checked for being one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. How about if I put it that way?
Yeah.
It really is something he needs to get through. I think he's laser focused on it. I think the MVP is he hasn't been talking about it all. And reporters keep asking him about it, and he goes, I just want to win a Super Bowl. It's the Baltimore fan base and the vitriol going back and forth, I think, is more about the way in which each fan base kind of looks at this. And it's a little bit different in the case. I don't really want to go down this rabbit hole unless you'd like to.
No, it's okay. Yeah. So trust me, it's taken up too much of everybody's life. Yep. It's like that conversation that just sucks all the oxygen out of the room. I hate it. And I hate the way that people talk to each other about it. The reality is we're two fan bases that are starved for a title for different reasons. You have this quarterback who needs that one Lombardi to really cement his legacy. But at the same time, you've got a football team that's won them before. And so for the Bills, the desperation is a little bit more, it's a little exacerbated because you're still trying to get that first one, and the chip on your shoulder, both as a fan base and admittedly as a roster. The players who have been around and been through it, the coach admits it's a problem that they kind of remedied this year when they changed over kind of wholesale, let a lot of veteran players go. He said one of the things they needed to do was get rid of the scar tissue of all the years that they've spent crashing into the mountain. Just every year trying to climb the mountain and wrecking into the side of it. And you see a fresh attitude to the team this season. And you're hoping that that's enough. But as fans, our scar tissue never goes away. There's no way to exacerbate that except to win. And so when you put those two dynamics together, I think that a lot of people, especially with the freedom social media gives people to talk to each other however they feel, I feel like it creates an environment for all of this animosity to kind of fester.
There's certainly a lot of that. There's certainly a lot of viewpoint about, why wasn't that the deal last year? What's different about this year? So, there's such a tiresome set of arguments to go with this. I'm going to say two brief things about the MVP award. One is that I think it's perfectly reasonable to look at supporting cast, which I think is one of the Buffalo big arguments. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing that needs to be considered in that same thing is quality of competition. And I think that's Lamar's big argument. Is the quality they played is significantly higher. And that's all I'll really say about it. Otherwise, I like full statistics that give the entire breadth of competition as opposed to picking what a quarterback did while standing on one foot on a Monday night.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll say this. My MVP take was that I wish they had just given it to Saquon Barkley so that everybody's mad. Because I hope they give it to the running back and then everyone's upset and all this complaining has been for nothing. So as we look ahead to Sunday, the Bills roster, obviously, it's very different from the one that we took to the field to play in Baltimore back in week 4. We have healthy linebackers this time. We have Teron Johnson. We have a savvier coaching staff. In what significant ways do you think the Ravens personnel has changed, or at least the makeup and some of the philosophies that they're implementing? How have they changed since week 4?
I'll give you this couple of big defensive changes, and this takes a little bit of explanation, but that's okay.
Sure.
The Ravens had Kyle Hamilton in the position I think he can do the most good, where he is the ace of trumps, playing up close to the line of scrimmage as a big nickel, as a dime. Early, they just gone to the dime defense, I believe, in week 4. As there might have been in week 3, they even went, but they just turned to that as a way to try and solve some coverage problems at inside linebacker and obvious passing gaps. They've since gone away from that. They don't really even have the safety depth to field a dime, and they have had to take him out of the ace of spades role that he has and move him back to be about the queen of hearts on the back end at free safety. But the addition by subtraction component of getting Marcus Williams out of there from free safety is just enormous. And so you actually had a much bigger gain for the team in that way. They also, Eddie Jackson was on the team. Eddie Jackson was an acquisition I absolutely detested in the offseason. Last 4 years, he'd given up 10 yards per target on average, and was not a guy I thought had a big chance to do it. But, he's cheap, and I thought, maybe the Ravens can find a smaller role for him that as a split field safety instead of a free safety, where he might have been getting messed up in Chicago. But Eddie Jackson just didn't want to follow the rules in terms of being in the right place in football. And Zach Orr, and he got in some sort of a shouting match. He was suspended, essentially left home for a game. Then he came back and he gave up a huge game at Cleveland. Or maybe I have it wrong. Maybe he gave up a huge game at Cleveland, then he got suspended. Not sure of the order there, but gave up 2 touchdowns passing, another one with a missed tackle in the loss to Cleveland. He was the man in terms of that loss. And then both of them have one's since been released. The other's had his contract reworked, so it can be a June 1 release next year when it's financially advantageous to the Ravens. But he won't see action again for the Baltimore Ravens, Marcus Williams. So both of them have been replaced. And now the back end of Hamilton and Ardarius Washington is the real strength of the team. Ardarius Washington's been fantastic. The defense since week 11 has been about the best in the NFL in just about any category you would pick. But they've been, in terms of pass yards, they were like 26th through 10 weeks, and now they've been first since. And they might have slipped a notch if you included last week's playoff game, where they had actually some very troubling returns to some of the difficulties, which were true in the first 10 weeks of the year. So that's the big change in the Ravens secondary. The other big change is at inside linebacker. So Trenton Simpson started the year as the weak side linebacker next to Roquan Smith. Roquan, solid middle linebacker, played the whole year, basically has not missed a snap. Might have missed a game actually, but he's the signal caller. He's on the field for every snap. So the weak side linebacker position, they had Trenton Simpson, and they said, okay, we're not going to play him every down. We're going to play him on a rotational basis with Harrison and with Board. And Harrison and Board both got thrown on in the first game against Mahomes. They lost their roles. Simpson took it over full time. Then they said, not sure if Simpson's the guy. Let's bring in a dime back. And they did that for several weeks, for as long as they could with Hamilton. And then they took him out of there and they went back to a rotational basis with this never good, by the way, when this happens with a second year player who loses his job and suddenly all of a sudden becomes a rotational player again. But he's then rotating with two, journeyman veteran guys. Harrison's never left the team, but he's a 50-year player playing on what's the special contract called? A qualified veteran contract where you can pay them an extra $1 million, not against the cap.
Yeah.
Yep. And Chris Board is the other guy who's he left and he returned. He's their special teams captain now. He's a guy who, nobody would have said you'd want this guy over Trenton Simpson on the field. And the two of them now are essentially splitting the time. Simpson only comes in at the end of blowouts. At this point, he's played, 15 snaps or something in the last 5 or 6 weeks.
I mean, it is noteworthy that you guys only have one linebacker who's playing more than 60% of your snaps. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it changed is the thing. They had Simpson playing a high percentage, and then he basically had to be sat down. I haven't, honestly, my feeling about the thing is I'm not sure that Simpson is a problem, but Harrison is a good run defender, and that's his strength. And if you look at Board, he's a guy they want on third downs. They're in a committed nickel, and they honestly, this is just so weird to have this situation in Ravens history because Ozzie always had a spare dime back for you. You always were able to find them. He had 3 in his pocket anytime he wanted them. But this year, for whatever reason, they haven't been able to maintain an extra safety. And that's part of the Eddie Jackson effect and the Marcus Williams effect is that Marcus Williams, basically failing as a high price free agent, but Eddie Jackson failing as a very cheap free agent still took away an option to sign somebody else.
Yep.
So even though a guy's cheap, if he's not going to be good, you got to be careful with using the roster spot.
It's the old opportunity cost.
There you go. Exactly.
That's the danger. So it's interesting to me to hear that you guys have had to go through all these machinations on defense because I will say that I've been a distanced Ravens fan. I've loved them ever since Ray Lewis because to me, Ray Lewis was everything I ever thought a football player should be. He was just an intense human being who found the perfect job and was one of the best at it in terms of what they asked him to do. And so in that way, I guess I just always expect that level of intensity from a Ravens defense. And so to hear that all of these kind of changes and that this has been such a feeling out process seems kind of foreign. And it's interesting to me as an opponent who's about to play you that it's been such a feeling out and kind of seeing what happened last week where you just annihilated the Steelers for the first half and then kind of let some of these, you hit the nail on the head, some of these poor tendencies of your depth players resurface.
Well, one of the really frustrating things about this last week was that the Ravens early in the season for the first 10 weeks, the one thing that was a constant was post-play emoting was at an all-time high. Everybody was pissed at each other about assignment breakdowns. Well, that really had gone away. But this last week, and this is, I think, the Ravens' biggest weakness against the Bills, is Brandon Stevens at right corner is extremely vulnerable to the back shoulder throw, and particularly with a big-bodied receiver like Keon Coleman over there, that presents real opportunity, I think, for Buffalo. But also is very, very vulnerable to getting beat deep, apparently. And he did by Van Jefferson in this game, and he kind of gave up on his coverage, and you can see Hamilton's in a spot where he had to make a choice between two coverage things. He chose an underneath route that he thought was the higher probability thing. Stevens gave up on the route going deep, and he faded off in coverage kind of thing. And you couldn't tell this from TV, but I can tell you can really see it at the stadium. Hamilton was unbelievably pissed. And he came back and he must have yelled at Stevens for 6 or 7 seconds as they're walking towards the sideline. And I just hadn't seen that kind of post-play emoting. By the way, probably nothing you can learn more from about what the assignment was supposed to be than post-play emoting. Really, you're missing out. That's one of the worst things in Taylor Swift cutaways is you often miss that. Mm-hmm. You our NFL game is all about capturing the emotion of the victors a lot of the time instead of trying to figure out what went wrong on the defensive side, where it'd be really nice.
See, that's the type of stuff that, again, if you like the game of football, you hone in on that because you go, because it's easy for you to sit here and create a bunch of whataboutisms about, well, you didn't know the play call and it could have been this and this could have been. No. Just take a look at who's screaming at the top of their lungs afterwards. Yeah. So one of the things, and you had made a comment about kind of like rebounding statistically over the last month for the Ravens defense. And there's something that I hate because I see this with Bills fans too. It was a part of the whole MVP discourse. It's a part of everything. This time of year when it comes to playoff matchups, aggregate stats are difficult for me because I take a look at them and I say to myself, how much does everything else you did this year actually matter? Why are we factoring it into the equation when you talk about what you should and shouldn't be concerned about? Perfect example. Denver comes into last week's game the second ranked in terms of DVOA defense in the entire NFL. Everyone talks about their pass rush acumen, which never materialized. And also, when they kept talking about how great this defense was, they didn't take into account that they've been lower than 20th for the last 5 weeks of the season. So in that way, they go out there and play the game on Sunday, and they look like a very porous kind of. There's not a lot of communication taking place in the defense, and they just get out coached, out schemed, out executed by the Buffalo Bills, and it gets away from them very quickly. So when I think about aggregate stats like that, when you think about, we finished this ranked here, or when people just go to box score check and they say to myself, like, I can pull up Pro Football Reference and I can say, okay, well, the Baltimore Ravens in 2024 were the 31st ranked passing defense in terms of yardage. But that doesn't tell the story. You just kind of hit on it. They've been trying to find themselves and they've found solutions. Some things still might not be corrected. What's a statistic or an analytic about the Ravens that you think is overblown? And what's one that you think might be being a little bit undersold by people like us who are trying to forecast this game?
Okay. Undersold. I'm going to go with missed tackle rate that they force in their opponents. It's one of the real strengths of the Ravens. It's not generally known. I think that's one of the places that undersold. I'm going to stay away from the passing statistics because I think people understand the trending component of the Ravens' pass defense has been. We've already kind of gone through that. In terms of something that's oversold, DVOA loves the Ravens' offense more than any offense pretty much in history. They're about the third or fourth ranked offense of all time by DVOA. I think that's probably a mild, at least, oversell. I do think they have the best offense in football, but I don't think that they have an offense that is so far above the others in recent years, and even so far above some of the other Ravens offenses like 2019, where they were a higher points per drive offense. I think that's a big deal. So if I had to pick the one, oversell, I think it would be the DVOA offensive number.
The missed tackle one's interesting to me because it's something that we've watched kind of fuel what has been this surging season for our running back, James Cook. And it's Khalil Shakir's entire game. It's the reason that he is our wide receiver number one, even in terms of statistics, even though not in terms of usage patterns and how you would expect a team to use their quote unquote number one wide receiver. It's how many tackles can you make a guy miss? Because if you can, generally speaking, make the guy miss the first tackle, the odds that they held you under 3 to 4 yards, the odds are pretty good that you obtained more than that. And 3 to 4 yards of play, I mean, if you were just looking at it from a statistical perspective in terms of quote unquote success rate of a play, did you get more than 1/3 or 1/2 of the yardage required to move the sticks? You're already right there.
Success rate.
Yeah. So the more missed tackles you can force as an offense, that's manna from heaven right there.
I'll give you one more statistic then that I think is undersold. And this is kind of a Lamar thing, honestly. Derrick Henry is a great running back. Nobody's saying anything else about that. But Derrick Henry had a 49.3% career success rate in his years at Tennessee. He came to Baltimore and he's had a career high at age 31 of 58.8% which is north of the career record for success rate, which nobody knows who that is, but it's Gus Edwards playing with Lamar Jackson, who's the all-time leader in running back success rate. Only been kept since 95, I think. Yeah, 30 years. And at 57.4%, he was the highest. But Henry has had just a remarkable year. Aaron Schatz thinks it's the best running back year of the 21st century. I think he owes Lamar Jackson maybe a couple of new cars. What I say when I'm on the radio here is that Lamar Jackson should get a 15% commission on all rushing yards.
Yeah. So when you talk about the addition of Henry and just the fact that I think what I was banking on, when you guys kicked our heads in back in week 4, I said, okay, that's fine. Because if we see him later in the year, he's 31. He's playing he plays a very physical brand of football. How long could he keep this up? It's been astounding to watch how each and every week he gets his. I don't know that I've seen a player who's put together a full and complete season like this, especially not at that age, where his physicality doesn't seem to be diminishing whatsoever. In fact, if anything, he's almost become more effective as the players on the other side of the ball have kind of been worn down by the rigors of an NFL season. How do you explain that dynamic of his game? Like, what are the Ravens doing differently to help him continue to churn out 100-yard performances?
I mean, they have lots of schematic advantages that they give Henry in terms of the Lamar Henry mesh point is the most powerful offensive weapon in all of football right now. It is without question, it is the thing. They can RPO out of it. They can run with either player out of it. It's incredibly hard to defend. It's the thing everybody complains about in terms of how the hell are we going to stop this group? And whatever you do to try and stop it, you have to make lots of sacrifices to do so. Meaning you have to sacrifice usually personnel on the back end, and that often will lead to some fairly juicy passing opportunities for Lamar if their linemen don't get downfield unnecessarily. That's been a problem this year. But in terms of what Henry is doing physically to maintain himself, I think that's all Henry. He's a workout warrior. He's been remarkable in that regard. And he's got 351 carries now this year, including the playoffs. And it's just remarkable for a 31-year-old. I can't say I've seen anything like it again. And to be honest, I was fairly lukewarm on the acquisition. I thought you can make Gus Edwards into a great running back. Why do you need to spend $10 million on Derrick Henry? You seriously, why didn't? And then it's obviously been proven that was a very worthwhile.
Listen, we all have them. We all have some takes that we go, you know what? I'm happy. I'm so happy to be wrong that I'll put that out there. I'll let you all see this one. I'll wear this as the red band. What is it? The scarlet letter? I'll wear this one.
Yes, the scarlet letter, right.
What I find interesting when I look over his game logs, 186 yards last week, 138, 147, 162. Chris, I saw you looking up his game logs over there on the screen. It's wild, the production that this guy is having. 5 touchdowns over the course of the last 4 games? The last team to hold him under 100 yards and also win the football game was the Philadelphia Eagles.
Mm-hmm.
What happened in that game? Now, was this just a fluke performance, or was there anything specific that the Eagles did to be able to hold him under that yardage threshold? Keep him from, he had his lowest yards per attempt of the last 2 months. What did they do that allowed them to win the football game while also holding him in check?
Okay, so they're extremely physical, and for my money, the Eagles are the scariest team right now in the NFL, the scariest potential Super Bowl opponent. And I think the Bills would find the same thing, that their front is extremely stout. They make any offensive line look kind of bad. And they have a lot of rotational players who are good. Like Jordan Davis doesn't play that many snaps, but he's very very demanding of the offensive lineman opposite him in terms of requiring a double team and then creating singles for everybody else. Ravens have the same thing with Travis Jones and Michael Pierce. It's just at a lower level in terms of what they get. And then the other players that they have are incredibly good. Their edge rushers are good. Jalen Carter played all but 1 snap against the Ravens at an incredibly high level. They're just a very scary team. And they're the only team this year that has really won the trench war on both sides against the Ravens. They dominated them both sides. A 5-point game is not even reflective of how close that game was. The Ravens had a backdoor score to cut it to 5, and now they've got one of these Bills streaks going where they haven't been beaten by more than a score for 3 years with Lamar.
Yep.
So
that's been one of my fears of this game, is that it's going to come down to physicality. And there aren't a lot of teams that do it better than the Ravens. It's one of, again, you think about the things that keep you up at night when it comes to matchups. It's just the pure physicality that their team is able to play with, Chris, compared to what we can muster. And that worries me, because this is a Bills team that is somewhat malleable. They're dependent on skill, and their defensive line exists, but they're not exactly stout. They have some pass rush acumen, but they're not exactly the most aggressive or most physical linemen. And so in that way, I don't know. You can talk about attitude all you want. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to muster the physicality. I mean, hell, Patrick Ricard. I was telling somebody I work with today. Ricard has been one of my favorite football players forever. I was an all-stat fan. I like physical fullback play. And what he does is a throwback to a version of football that doesn't exist anymore. And yet the Ravens have found a way to will it into existence here in the 21st century. And they just batter people. And he's such a freak athlete for his size that he can get out in space, and he can just absolutely, especially against a team like Buffalo with undersized linebackers that cover the pass. How do you stack up against a player like that? That's the thing that Sean McDermott and Bobby Babbitt are going to be going over all week. How do we manufacture this thing that we don't naturally come by? We don't have the defensive line or the offensive line of the Philadelphia Eagles. We just don't. And so how do we find a way to stay in this football game knowing that we don't have the requisite physicality?
Assuming the Ravens go to a lot of their 12, 21, 22 sets. Mm-hmm. Okay. And they're playing heavy. And this last week, they played 2.39 tight ends plus fullback plus OL6 per play. And if you don't know how enormous that number is, I can just tell you the highest number for a non-Ravens team in the last many years is 199 by the 2019 Vikings. The Ravens in 2022 were at 235, I believe, for the year. So just they operate in a different universe from the rest of the NFL in terms of what they do in terms of size. So the question I have, Very, is how comfortable is this Bills team getting a third defensive lineman playing base for a substantial portion of the game?
This is where you're going to ask yourself some uncomfortable questions. And so the only way around this and having to deal with this type of conversation is to take a look at the offensive versus, our offense versus your defense. And this is where I don't know. I really go back and forth over how we might win this game, right? Because one thing I'll say is this: you're talking about how can I add in a wrinkle, or how comfortable are you adding players to things? The Bills might opt to play a little bit more base defense and maybe bring in Dorian Williams, but this Tiger doesn't generally change its stripes. You've got Taron Johnson out there and nickel cornerback.
That's the question, because it could be for the Ravens. It could be an addition by subtraction to force Johnson off the field.
Yep, exactly. Because then what they say is, oh, wait a minute, you're going to put a Dorian Williams out there as a third linebacker who can't cover. Oh, good. Well, we've got a Mark Andrews. We've got an Isaiah Likely, and we're just going to take that every time you give it to us. And so what I take a look at and I say, okay, our front seven obviously is healthier than it was the last time around. We also only put more than 8 defenders in the box 12% of the time, which was the third lowest of any running back this season.
That's 8+, right? Not more than 8.
Yeah.
8+.
Yeah, 8+ defenders. We committed nothing. We had 7 guys in the box. Sometimes we only had 6. And they tried to go light, and they tried to do a lot of things with our secondary, and you guys beat us to death like that. It was, and what was more disappointing as a fan was to watch how the slip screens in the passing game out of those formations worked when you had coverage players on the field. But that's what happens when you get sucked into, okay, we know we're small, but we're going to try to key in on the run. Oh no, it's Justice Hill slipping out of the backfield and getting away from everybody. I guess one of the things I look at on the other side is how can we manufacture offense against this defense? Joe Brady has really learned how to make wine out of water here when he's dealing with kind of an unheralded group of wide receivers, and yet using some of his 3x1 and 4x1 formationals, he's figured out how to create conflict within the defense and their rules, specifically teams that skew more towards man coverage than those who play match or those who play zone. And so I guess when I think about how the Ravens are going to approach this, do you foresee them kind of forsaking, because I think historically you've kind of skewed more towards man coverage, but I'm thinking back to Marcus Peters and some of the guys who are really adept at that. How do you see that?
Okay, at a high level, almost every NFL team plays substantially more zone than man.
Sure.
So the question is whether you play 25 or 30% zone, 25 or 30% man. The Ravens have done some of both, but I would say they are fairly committed to zone given their safety play and the quarters coverage and the too deep look they can give you. I think that's been one of the strengths of this team. Now, one thing that they don't do, and this is an important coverage concept that the Ravens don't do, which means the Bills will know exactly how they want to allocate their assets or how they might want to run a play, is they don't switch or travel with their cornerback. So Brandon Stevens is always at right corner, and the Bills know exactly where he's going to be, and they go right after him, play after play if they want. And it's been an enormous frustration for Ravens fans. I've suggested that it might be better to have Wiggins, who's been, I always want to call him Allen Wiggins, the old second baseman for the Orioles, but it's Nate Wiggins. Have him follow to that side, or even follow the opponent's number one receiver, which I'm not sure Buffalo really qualifies as having a guy who's that guy. I mean, I'm not talking about following Shakir with Wiggins, who's an outside guy. So I'd be talking about maybe not switching sides anyway, but Wiggins being a guy at right corner that you use. The Ravens have been unwilling to do that to Stevens. They've kept him in there basically every snap the whole season. He is their third safety if they need another one. They've shown that. I almost wonder if the Ravens wouldn't benefit if there were a problem at safety that required him to go back there, and then it would create Wiggins as the right corner at that point. He's been a big liability, and I would say the Bills are enormously well equipped to attack him directly with their bigger receivers. Cooper could do it too, but Coleman really is exactly the big body that gives him a lot of trouble.
That's going to be interesting. I'm interested to see how each team, because this chess match is fascinating. You guys obviously have something of a trump card in the form of Derrick Henry that every team has no choice but to respect because you've already seen it. You could also be the team that says, hey, we'll let them have that, and hopefully we can slow it down enough that we can force them to a couple passing situations. Maybe the weather gives us a hand and that slows down a little bit of both offenses, but we think we like our passing attack a little better. There's a lot that goes on here within this that there's no way to parse ahead of time. And that's why it's such a coin flip when you look at the line on the game. Mm-hmm. Now, with that said, being a road dog being a road favorite, I mean, now you started off the week as a road dog, and anybody who could have gotten that, I think, hammered it. So now the line has shifted apropos of nothing. Something that I think could probably dramatically change the fortunes of the Ravens in this one. The health of Zay Flowers. What is the health of that player, and what does he mean to the team in this specific game?
He's enormously important, and I feel very certain he's not going to play. But they got through without Zay Flowers this last week, and they used a little bit of everybody against a Steelers team that knows them very well. But they used Andrew Miller, who they brought up off the practice squad, and he had 3 catches for 12 yards, which he wasn't really a factor, honestly. But they're throwing him the football. They're distributing him. And they used Sims, the punt returner, for a big end around for 15 yards on their big response touchdown drive in the second half that set up the Henry run. And then they used I'm losing my mind here. Tez Walker was only in there for 2 snaps, but this other guy had more. Well, Wallace was their leading receiver in terms of snap count this last week. And, he's a fourth or fifth receiver normally, but because they need to keep Bateman healthy, they basically are trying to pull him off. They're doing the same thing with Odafe Owe, by the way. He's so critical to their pass rush, and they're so thin at pass rusher, they need to make sure they keep certain players healthy. So right now, Bateman and Owe are the two they're protecting to an extreme degree. I'm forgetting this additional wide receiver, and it's driving me nuts. Aguilar also was in the passing game. And if you look at the drive at the end of the second quarter, they're putting up 21-0 when they drove right down the field in a couple of minutes. They had 2 runs by Henry to start it off when they're really thinking about, should we just try and end the half at 14-0? And then they got a first down on a pass to one player. Was it Miller? That wasn't Miller. It was somebody else. Bateman. They got a first down to Bateman. And then they had 5 different receivers on consecutive plays catch the football, finishing up with Hill getting the ball into the end zone. So it wasn't, normally you keep the same players on the field, particularly in the last 2 minutes. They drove right down the field and had 6 different receivers for 6 different consecutive receptions.
So who is the go-to option in the passing attack at this point?
Well, Bateman, he's had an outstanding season. 10.5 yards per target is the Ravens' all-time record for a receiver. He also set the Ravens record for touchdown percentage for a receiver at 12.5%. So he's had a very big year. He's not a high-volume guy either. I look at him as kind of like a Keon Coleman, but he's a good deep threat and a very good intermediate threat. The best route runner on the Ravens by far. He's a guy who loses people at the top of the stem. They don't have anybody else who's like that. Zay Flowers, people mistake for a good route runner, but he's honestly just a guy who uses his suddenness to lose people rather than throw a juke at the corner to make him make a misstep.
Okay.
It's a big difference between those two.
Okay. See, and that's interesting. So now, we almost have a similar problem, you and I. Our defenses are like, hey, we've got these good cover men. What are they doing? Who are they watching? Nobody really knows who is assigned to whom and whether it's in your best interest to have a specific player with a specific skill set cover a specific receiver. This matchup is just such a dice roll to me. And you obviously do far more film study than me. You're far more nuanced in this. How confident are you that the Baltimore Ravens are going to be moving on to go play the Kansas City Chiefs?
See, here's the issue with this. I'm never confident. They were playing the Browns in Week 18, and they needed to win as 18-point favorites to secure the division title. I wasn't confident then. So I don't know that you can really go by how I feel about it, because I can always find a reason why this NFL team across from you has a certain advantage in a certain situation. I think this is basically a coin flip game. One fan base is going to go home unhappy. The other fan base is going to be thrilled about the quality of the win that they got. And I think the only thing that could mar this would be, some injuries involved that would make people weaker for playing the Chiefs. I just, neither side wants that. I do think it'll be a fairly physical game. I don't see it being as physical as some of the games against the Steelers or the Eagles. And it was one of the questions I kind of left aside for you is who has really tested the Bills physically this year so far?
And unfortunately, the answer to that is kind of underwhelming, because when you look at the Bills and I think about who did we actually have to go toe to toe with, and was it a tough game? I think about the New England Patriots in Week 16. Some people might scoff at that, but we were down 14-0 and we really had to dig out of a hole. And yet the weather was such, the passing game wasn't really there. We were only able to manufacture 150 passing yards in the game. You had to climb out somehow. And it was, okay, it's time to go put our big boy pants on and put hat on a hat and let's go run the football. And they found their second gear, albeit against a 4-win team in New England. So that's concerning. The New York Jets on Monday Night Football in October played us very physically. A game with a lot of acrimony, a game with a lot on the line for both teams. So it was sort of emotional. At one point they had turned the lights out for some sort of TV timeout in stadium thing. And in that timeout, our left tackle Deion Dawkins got into like a dust up with one of the Jets players, Michael Clemens. And so it was just like, that was a game that was physical and chippy. And then there's the Baltimore Ravens, and that's it. So this is not a group who have been physically oppressed a lot by an opponent. And I'd like to say that when they have been, the results haven't always been pretty. Now, we've managed to come out on top twice, but that one time we didn't. We resoundingly did not, to the point where they waved the white flag like Rocky should have and not gotten Apollo Creed killed. We waved the white flag and pulled Josh Allen off the field and said, Mitch, go out there. Mitch Trubisky, get out there, bleed the clock out and get us home, because I don't want to see this get worse than it has to. I really believe that that's going to be the biggest thing that dictates our success or failure in this game is, can they answer the bell here?
By the way, tremendous respect for McDermott for how he ended that game. They got done with the last 7 minutes and 11 seconds, 7:17, I think it was, in 11 plays. And yeah, I mean, that just never happens. Usually one team's trying to catch up. And they did that against Tomlin as well. Tomlin threw in the towel basically and said, okay, we need to move on to the next game. I always respect opposing coaches when they do that. The team that did not do that was Tampa Bay, and they paid for it with their number one receiver getting hurt during the final minutes. And it's just a very sad thing.
And that's it. It's like, look, we lost. Okay, guys, this is over. It's 31-10. Let's get the hell out of here. Get back to the locker room. It's all over but the crying. And, you know, from a fan perspective, I could see some people kind of wrinkle their nose at that and go, why I want my guys to fight? Get that out of here. Nope. Not a meaningless game in week 4, not in a meaningless game in week 16 or 17 or 18. Get me to single elimination football. And then, you know what? If you want to go out like King Leonidas on your shield, God bless you.
Yeah. That same fan who says, I want my guys to fight, is also the guy who never understands why you ever have to play your backup catcher. You know, it's just, you're just not understanding how you get through a season doing that. Anyway.
I love it. I can't wait to see how this one boils down, man. I mean, it's just an incredible matchup against two teams that, like I said, I mean, I question who has the most pressure on them, you know, because Harbaugh's got his title, right? He's got a title. In fact, he's got 2 of them. And at the same time, or no, he's got 1.
He has 1.
He has 1. He's got 1, and he has been on and off the hot seat over the years. I feel like he's had lulls where some people in the fan base have wanted him fired, and it's almost the same thing that Mike Coughlin used to do. Coughlin.
I'll say, well, Tom Coughlin, your guys are going to be more familiar, obviously, with the situation there, but the Tomlin and Harbaugh situation. Harbaugh, there's always this 3-level background noise of a vocal minority of Ravens fans that want him fired. I just have put out an all points alert saying, look, I want panelists to talk about why the Ravens should move on from John Harbaugh after the season. I've gotten 10, 12 people who want to take the pro Harbaugh side. I've gotten 0 who want to take the anti Harbaugh side. One guy just, guys on my show regularly says, I'd like to take it just to be devil's advocate in this. And that honestly might be the best we can do.
He wouldn't even be doing it in good faith. And then meanwhile, Mike Tomlin's in your division and the guy gets to 500 and then basically his team's quit on him. And it's almost like it's a dog and pony show to like, hey, look at my longevity. And at the same time, what do you do in the postseason? It's an abomination.
Well, the Steelers fans they were at that level 3 for 5 years ago, and then it went up about 1 level per year. Right now, they're at 8. And the national media is picking up on it too and saying, Tomlin, this might be the time he has to go. There's talk about trading Tomlin potentially, and one of the big things is maybe the Chicago Bears get Mike Tomlin. They've got the quarterback in theory. Mike Tomlin maybe deserves to go to a situation where he has the quarterback instead of this horrible situation of having 2 good ones in the division and not having one yourself is just it's a very tough position to be playing from.
See, I'll never feel bad after living the Tom Brady experience. I'll never feel bad for anybody ever.
There you go.
But so it's just funny, like Sean McDermott trying to get into that Harbaugh conversation. He's had his detractors, but this year he's really turned a corner and he's admitted as much. He's publicly talked to our friend Tyler Dunn, did a whole interview with him where he kind of exposed the fact that having a mirror held up to himself last year was an awakening for him. And he took it seriously, trying to find another methodology and another way to lead and kind of just questioning himself on why am I here and what am I doing? Am I being the best coach I can be? Servant leadership kind of stuff. And his approach this year is what's led us here to the precipice of a division title and maybe a Super Bowl. conference title, is just this idea that he's empowered the people who work with him instead of trying to manage them. He's empowered his players rather than managed them. And so I've always gotten that vibe from Harbaugh. You know, Harbaugh seems more like a facilitator of a really good football team than a guy who comes in and dictates, here's what we're going to do. And I think that the best usually are. And I've always held him in high regard. I don't want to get out coached in this game. And yet at the same time, I feel like they've definitely had their back and forth. This Harbaugh and McDermott. I think that the Bills franchise and the Ravens franchise over the last few years have traded blows. This is just one more chapter in what's becoming a really great rivalry. And that's where you figure it out is in the postseason. Like, Chris, you always say it. Rivalries are born of meaningful games.
100%.
And so the Bills are about to play another one. We've played a couple in the regular season. Now we're going to play a couple in the postseason. I love it. I can't wait to see how this chapter unfolds. And I'm really happy you were able to find time to join us to talk about it. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find your show and where they can follow you on social media?
Sure. I'm at Film Study Ravens on Twitter. That's probably the easiest place. The website is filmstudybaltimore.com. I'm Film Study Baltimore Ravens Talk if you're looking for your favorite podcast platform. I put out an unbelievable amount of content, about 9 shows per week, and variety of angles on this. But the Know Your Foe show, which Drew had just recorded before this one, is one of the favorites, and Buffalo fans might like that one.
Ken McKusick, Film Study Ravens on Twitter, Film Study Baltimore, the website, one of our, I guess, longest running podcast guests, and the guy that brings the most of his listeners over to us. So we appreciate that.
Here's what's shocking. He's admitted that for having a much larger platform than ours, I somehow bring a bump to his ratings. How do you parse that?
It's simple because you're not X's and O's guy. And I think Ken gets a string of X's and O's guys, and then there's a break with this guy that doesn't know his dad and drinks a ton of beer.
I can't wait for Dave Gear to just fight you and shove you in the trunk of a car. It's so funny. And it is funny that he prefaces all of my appearances over on the Ravens Film Study, where he's like, this guy, he goes, if you hear a sound in the background, you're not crazy. That is this guy just cracking an incessant number of beers. It's part of his charm. I love Ken. I always like getting together with him. In fact, everything lays out. We'll be having dinner with him on Saturday night.
Yes.
It'll be nice. I'm sure his wife will not find us as entertaining as he does, but either way, that's the risky run when you come to Buffalo and hang out with the Rock Pile Report. So with that, let's hit our keys to victory.
Wow, that's a lot of keys. Bigger the keychain, more powerful the man.
On the offensive side of the ball, the Bills have got to find a way to weaponize the 4x1 and 3x1 sets. And when I say that, what I mean is, it's been a very, in fact, I'm going to tweet out a video, Chris, and I'm going to put it out
I'm sure you are.
I'm going to put it out right now. It's in our bookmarks. I love this thing. There's a guy, and I don't want to miscredit him, so let me find it.
Jerry Coleman.
Earthworm Jim's lame brother. Jesus Christ, that guy should get a chin first and then come criticize my city. Either way, there is a video. Guys, you can find it. I'm not going to do this in real time, but at Rock Pile Report on Twitter, I'm going to tweet it out. It'll be on our Twitter handle. This guy did a fantastic YouTube breakdown of just how exactly Joe Brady has found a way to use bunch formations. And not just bunch formations, but dirty bunch formations with motion attached to it to really unravel opposing defenses. We are going to have to do that in spades because the strength of this Ravens defense is its defensive line and linebackers against the run. Sheer size and power of that interior defensive line makes them really imposing. Because if you want to give me a goog on this, what is Michael Pierce's weight? Michael Pierce. Wait. There are only 5 teams that have run for over 100 yards in the Ravens all year.
345.
345 pounds. Oh my God. Dude is just a brick shit house. Yes, I did say that. A brick shit house. Is that an old timey? Like,
never heard of it before.
Of course you haven't. Only 5 teams have 100 yards rushing on the Ravens. And it's mostly teams with well-coordinated passing attacks, right? Like it was Philly, it was Tampa Bay, it was Denver. That they found ways to pull defenders out of the box and then run the ball. In 4 of their last 5 games, they've given up less than 60 yards on the ground. Now, those teams, some of them sucked on offense. You know, it was one of the things when we talked about it with Ken. I have it here on my phone, and I think it's worth noting that when you take a look at some of the defensive stats, the DVOA stuff that people like to talk about, when you get to this, none of the Ravens' final 8 opponents ranked in the top 10 for DVOA on offense. And only 2 were in the top 18. That was Philly and that was the Chargers. You know, that's why I don't love these just like aggregation stats. But at the same time, it is noteworthy that they do. If you don't bring your A game, they will stop you from moving the ball on the ground. What I will say is that I think the Bills are uniquely qualified to make this work. I wouldn't try to manufacture my entire offense on the ground. I think you're going to have to pass to set up the run. And in that way, these bunch formations with motion kind of mixed into them have given the Bills an edge where you've got a guy like Curtis Samuel getting natural separation again, or manufactured separation against a player like Pat Surtain. Like that doesn't happen in a vacuum. So I think that if they continue to rely on their strengths of the passing game in this specific formation and manipulation of the defense, they can throw their way towards having a good day on the ground. And I think that that's going to be, it's going to be a requirement. I'd expect this game, even in the bad weather, you know, this is something that Ken touched on, you know, the kind of invulnerability of Joe Flacco to a quarterback like Lamar Jackson and how weather impacts what is a fairly mediocre passing game. I think that you have to find a way to open up those running lanes by taking the linebackers and making them question. Every single time you put a multi-wide receiver bunch formation out there on the field, oh my God, who's my assignment? Who's my assignment? Who's my assignment? And then pair that with a one-cut run. And then you hit them with that enough, you throw it a couple times, bring the linebackers back out. And that's going to be the way that you win this thing. You're going to have to pass to set up the run. Now, I think on the other side of the ball in defense, it's going to take composure at the linebacker level of the defense. Chris, there's a graphic here. The pass catchers of the Ravens don't scare me. But what makes them dangerous is the way that they manipulate your linebackers and safeties with the threat of their rushing attack, and something else Ken hit on during his segment here, which was the mesh point. And the fact that in all of their RPO stuff, you have no choice but to respect the fact that not only do I have to have eyes on Derrick Henry, I also have to watch this quarterback for the impending quarterback run. And what that does to you is it leaves you as a linebacker wide open for passes to be made over your back, directly over your shoulder. You know, you look at this passer chart. This has been Lamar Jackson throughout the 2024-2025 season. Look at the amount of production that comes when he attacks just over the linebackers' heads, Chris. That's impressive.
Very impressive.
I mean, it's borderline unstoppable. He's got one turnover thrown compared to 15, 18 touchdowns. And it's short yardage. It's not like he's airing it out. It's not like he's challenging safeties. He's literally just baiting you into you as a linebacker having no choice but to respect his legs and the running back. And then he catches you flat-footed and throws it just over your head. Our linebackers are going to have to trust that the safeties will come down and help support this. And I think that's and this is where I think Matt Milano versus Dorian Williams makes a lot of sense. Doesn't it?
Sure.
This is a game where you're going to have a player whose instincts are right more often than they're wrong. And who you can put out there on the field and not only understand that, hey, you have to be assignment sound at the linebacker level. You also have to play with a certain amount of intuition in terms of the mesh point and whether or not this is a play the quarterback actually intends to take off and run. Or, hey, this is one where he's definitely going to hand it off and we just need to crash to the line of scrimmage and try to muddy this up. Or he's not going to do either of those things. And so I should probably drop. I should drop and shade whichever way he's leaning so that it cuts off his angle as far as where he might quickly play action pass that ball to. This game is going to put a tremendous amount of stress on Terrell Bernard and on Matt Milano and Dorian Williams and everybody else who might play in that second level of the defense. It's going to be a real dogfight to see if they're up to it. You know? And the Bills' defensive line is going to have to find a way to keep those guys clean so that they can make these decisions. They're going to have to bring their big boy pants. You know, given the benching of Dwayne Carter last week, I'd honestly be surprised if we don't see Eli Ankou. Just to give the Bills some extra beef in the trenches with another one tech. And it's going to be on them to keep these linebackers clean so that they can operate. Because there aren't going to be, I do not see them doing some of the things that fans are advocating for, you know, play base 4-3. That's not what we are. And if you're advocating taking Taron Johnson off the field, that almost works to the Ravens' benefit. I think that your defensive line and your linebackers are going to have to play their best game of the entire season. The most composed version of themselves. And then the final key, Chris, and this applies to everybody, regardless of position. You got to toughen the fuck up. One of the things that's been the hallmark of the Buffalo Bills in all of their playoff exits with Sean McDermott and Josh Allen at the helm here. It hasn't been injuries. Hasn't been, well, glaring coaching miscues. What, Chris? Probably one game.
Yeah.
13 seconds.
I mean, if you're just going playoffs.
Just playoffs.
I mean, there's a lot you can get to with 13 seconds with what happened with Kansas City last year, what happened with Cincinnati the year before. So you can get to, that's why we're 1-3 in the divisional round.
But what I think a lot of that comes back to feebleness, fragility, frailty. These are all words that I looked up in a thesaurus because I just Googled weakness. I was like, Google weakness. Then give me some synonyms for weakness. This is a team that gets bullied when they lose. They don't just lose, they get punked. They get their shirt pulled over their head and pink-bellied like you were 10 years old on the playground again. In 2020, the Chiefs bullied the Bills in the AFC title game, specifically on the offensive line. That play at the end of the game where Josh Allen throws the ball off a defender's face mask and it starts a fight, that happens because he's been harassed the entire night. Because our offensive line was undermanned, undersieged. They played soft football, and we lost a game because of it. In 2022, the Bengals came into Buffalo with a really vanilla game plan and just executed and played really physical football. Blew the Bills right off the field and left players admitting to a man that they came with no juice. We didn't have our fastball today, and we didn't have any energy on the sideline. They punished it right out of us. In 2023, our linebackers got bullied by a really physical approach to the game by their running backs and tight ends. And they took advantage of that mismatch over and over and over again. And then we had safeties who combined for 6 missed tackles. Why do you think it is that Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer were moved on from?
Ancient age.
When you watch that game happen and you go, shit, our linebacker depth chart is weak, and we don't have depth. And also, by the way, our safeties are starting, and I guess they're starters in name, but when you put them out there in the field, they look old as shit. They look finished. I'm shocked Jordan Poyer found work this season. Didn't he look every single part of washed?
Yeah.
We can't have any more of that. Meanwhile, it is baked into the Baltimore Ravens' DNA to be hard-nosed, smash-mouth, aggressive, and physical. They don't pussyfoot around. It's the only reason that they have a 300-pound fullback on the damn roster. I'm a Mike Allstott fan. You know, like, I love those Shane Gillis bits on Rogan when he'll just get drunk and start yelling, put on Jamie, put on a Mike Allstott highlight. Like, put on Mike Allstott highlights, and he just keeps doing it. That's fun. I love the physicality of a physical, fast, freakish fullback. Say that 3 times fast. Patrick Ricard for the Ravens is amazing to watch play the game of football, and he personifies what that offense is when it's at its best. We are a group of hyper-physical dudes who exist to punch you in the face just over and over and over again. We will run through you, run over you, and then we throw the ball sometimes. Chris, give it a go. When's the last time Lamar Jackson threw for more than 275 yards? Just look it up for me. If you don't want to believe me that physicality is their mindset coming into this game, they just, against the Steelers, scored on an 85-yard, 13-play drive where they didn't throw a single pass. They just punched him in the face over and over and over again until they found the end zone. They are built to wear down your resolve as a football player, to keep hammering you until somebody breaks. And once they do, they lean on that advantage that they found.
He's got 2 games over 300 yards.
The entire season?
Yeah.
Hilarious.
Both in October, back-to-back weeks.
The Baltimore Banner has a writer named Jonas Schaefer, and he wrote this in this week's piece when he was recapping the Steelers game, and I think that it speaks to what they're going to try to do here in this game. Without Flowers' explosive play potential, the Ravens leaned more on their size and the element of surprise. Over the regular season's first 16 weeks, Todd Monken had called just 13 plays with 6 offensive linemen on the field. On Saturday, they ran even more. None of Monken's 15 jumbo-style runs featured a single wide receiver on the field. The Ravens overwhelmed Pittsburgh with their size, mostly in the middle of the field, rushing for 72 yards in those 6 lineman sets with no wide receivers. This is a team that is very comfortable saying, listen, we don't even want to threaten you with the run. We are going to tell you that we plan to run. You can't stop it. Isn't that intimidating if you're an opposing football team?
Sounds like it.
Much like Ivan Drago, they don't even hide the fact that their plan is to just throw straight lefts and haymakers and just, you don't have any choice. You got to stand in the pocket and trade with them. Just like they're Dolph Lundgren. You just got to hang in there. You can sit back here and try to romanticize this and talk all the X's and O's, postulate about roster mechanics that might make a difference. The reality is there's no easy way out, baby. And it's funny. There's an actual version of that song that's been remade since the movie came out. Bullet for My Valentine, I think, is the band. I don't love their entire catalog, but they do a cover of No Easy Way Out that's on my workout playlist. You are going to have to try to meet the aggression of this football team head on. The physicality, the intensity that they want to bring to this thing, you either have to meet them or you have to find a way to break it. Yeah? Ivan Drago, I must break you. That's what the Bills have to find a way to do to this mindset of the Baltimore Ravens. You have to force them into things they're uncomfortable doing. You have to make them a passing team. You have to, Chris, the same way that we're looking at, hey, use the scoreboard to your advantage to get them to stop running. You don't think they're having the same conversations about the Buffalo Bills?
Probably.
Because our rushing attack's nothing to sneeze at. The difference is they're very adept at this. They're built for it. They're equipped to do it. This roster, top to bottom, to a man, is going to need to spend the entire week every night before they go to sleep at night listening to Kyle Williams' speech in the tunnel about dragging your opponent into the deep water. Listen to that every night before you go to bed. Maybe you can manifest the mentality it's going to take to get into this. And who knows, maybe Sean McDermott has a trick or two up his sleeve. Yeah, this is from Tyler Dunn's interview with Sean McDermott. Weird, right? The guy who wrote a hatchet job, a hit piece about the coach, is now sitting in his office doing an interview. That's weird. One of the things Sean McDermott credited with making this season so different was that he took some of the criticisms of his past and used them to shape his new approach to being an NFL head coach. This is a quote from Tyler's article. He says he grabs a packet on his desk from the other side of the room. These are my playoff notes. This is from all the years. Mindset, the game, distraction, first round bye, Super Bowl. My job is to get these guys in the right spot to perform their best. And that includes Josh. I have to equip him. What do they need me to be for the best, for them to be the best they are this week? Do they need me to challenge them? Do they need me to be there supporting them? Do they need some confidence? What do they need from me? It's kind of a weird way to look at things, but it makes a lot of sense. When I realized that being the head coach and what I did wasn't all that important, I became a better head coach. Servant leadership, Chris. Sean McDermott figured it out. Look at some of the players who have already answered the bell over the course of the season and become something that nobody expected from them. Mac Hollins, Spencer Brown, Deion Dawkins, Keon Coleman. These are players who have not only stepped up, but Chris, you could say are some of the toughest players in the roster.
They are. And leaders.
And you wouldn't have predicted that coming into the year. These are guys who are tough and aggressive, and they wear their love of that aggression on their sleeves. It's on Sean to get everybody on that page. It's on Sean to get every one of these guys ready to play composed but violent football for 4 quarters. Match the Ravens' impending intensity. And maybe, just maybe, you're going to get one step closer to touching Lombardi. I can't wait. I can't wait to see how this thing plays out. And if this truly is the end, it's been a pleasure doing these game day previews. But for tonight, we got to get the hell out of here. I'm Drew Gear. That's Chris Kruger. And this has been your divisional round preview.